Axel Merk, President and Chief Investment Officer of Merck Investments, with my morning update. Happy Tuesday it is. So markets were up and up and up. And as I speak, we're taking a little bit of a leg down. S&P futures are currently still up 20 something, 21, I believe. The reason I mentioned the markets being up is the VIX curve is no longer inverted, at least wasn't as of this morning. And without getting too technical, since 2018, a lot of people have heard about the VIX curve. Remember the VIX blow up in 2018, the short vol trade was all that popular. Well, before I get too complicated and technical here, to just say that in plain English, in normal times, we are reasonably sure about the present and we're uncertain about the future. And that means volatility and the current state is what it is. But then if you're trying to kind of hedge yourself against market events, you've got to pay a premium going forward. And so the expectation is that fear is greater in the future. In times of panic, the present is very uncertain and the future is more certain. And so, and you can express that or see that, read that from the VIX index, the volatility index in the equity market. We've had the VIX index in recent years, it was extraordinarily low in the teens often, and then it shot up to over 80, and now everybody's happy. It's under 35. We're at 31. That's still considered very high, but the as of this morning anyway, future volatility, at least 3 months volatility out, was more volatile than the current volatility. And so these are derivatives one can trade. And by all means, we're not giving investment advice. We do not encourage you to trade derivatives, especially not the VIX index. Let me give you a little bit of disclosure while I'm at it. And notably, while there's an expression of volatility, because you can actually trade volatility itself, that measure gets distorted by the traders. But this is one sign of normalization. When future volatility in the market is priced in higher. And the way to think about it is, again, is if you want to buy fire insurance, right? When there's a fire, buying fire insurance is very expensive, whereas when there is no fire, then it's cheaper. And so right now it is cheaper to buy fire insurance that excludes the current period, right? Whereas normally it is betting on a fire today is not expensive. Dollar is weaker today. Indeed, the Norwegian kroner is the strongest currency today, and so that's been battered by obviously the weak crude markets. The crude oil is now up 5.5%. If one still talks percentages, in West Texas at 13.40. Brent is at 21.50 or so. Please not hesitate. My screen here is a little blurry. 21.12 it says here. And so with that, the Nordic, actually the Swedish krona is now the strongest currency. And the weakest currency is the Swiss franc, obviously a perceived safe haven. And the euro is also kind of on the weak side, but all the major currencies are up versus the dollar right now. If I look at the bond markets, bonds are stronger today. The 10 years up 10 ticks, the 30 years up 30 ticks. 3-month LIBOR is at 89 basis points, and I'm mentioning the intrabank lending rate, the 3-month interbank lending rate, because that's still substantially higher than 3-month treasuries, which are currently at 7 basis points. And the effective Fed funds rate is at 4 basis points. And so now gold I haven't mentioned, partially because it was plunging as I was chatting. So right now, the spot gold is minus $14 or 85 basis points at 16.99, just under 1700. Gold futures is at 1711, down $13. Note that gold was higher earlier today, and then just a few minutes ago it was lower. So what's happening around the world? The Europeans eased some standards for banks. They're suspending some Basel III rules, notably on leverage. Those are things that are currently in effect, or they were supposed to get stricter, and so that's being suspended. And with that, presumably a little bit easier. Um, Things like that. On the one of the things that is not happening is mergers in the banking sector. That was raised this morning. That it's happening very slowly. But talking about mergers, Democrats are working on a proposal to apparently limit mergers in the current environment. And that's Elizabeth Warren and AOC, and so the left wing of the party. Uh, and you can argue this either way, but if you have the financial wherewithal, why not acquire a few things? I mentioned earlier, a few days ago, that some countries are restricting purchases by foreigners. Now, should you also restrict it domestically, or should you restrict it at all? Restricting capital allocation is always dicey, even if those things are well intended. Um, Talking about allocating capital, there's more talk about the capital not being allocated to tax authorities. New York City, and again, aside from not being investment advisors, of course, not tax advice either. The New York City historically gets about $700 million in revenue from people who don't live in New York City but work in New York City. And when you work from outside the city, you still pay taxes if you have your workplace there, but there are exceptions, notably if you're forced to work outside of the city. And so there's currently the threat that New York City might lose out on a big chunk of tax revenue when they obviously could need that money very much. But join the club. A lot of people could need money right now. Um, then um, Stores around the globe, there is an easing of restrictions. In Germany, retail stores are opening up more broadly. Bavaria had a rule that if you had more than 8,000 square feet, you couldn't open it. Now they have changed that if you have more than 8,000 square feet, you can only open 8,000 square feet, 8,000 square feet. And so these are obviously very big, larger shopping places. And they have this rule that you can only have one person for every about 200 square feet. Um, and so I'm not suggesting that that's the way to go or not. I'm just mentioning this as what's happening around the world. In California, we've not gone that direction. In the Bay Area, it appears that we'll be increasing our restrictions until the end of May. Now, you can do that, but it is quite notable. Anybody who walks around here or drives around, is traffic is picking up here in this area. And so the restrictions may not be eased, but people who, if they think that the restrictions are unreasonable, then they will not abide by them. And so this idea of gradually opening things up, I think, is well warranted, because when people see that the sensible decisions are being made, and I'm not suggesting that things are not sensible where I am, but if you think about it, it's quite natural to use a sledgehammer in the beginning, but then you've got to ease restrictions. And the example comes up in our household is the gardener. The gardener can work with social distancing, right? I mean, and obviously that's just representative for other jobs of that sort. Um, the city gardener can work, but not the private gardener. And we pay our gardener and others do, but I would think that many that have lost their job do not. And of those who do have a job, I'm sure a certain percentage doesn't pay the gardener either. And maybe here in Palo Alto, people pay the gardener more because they try to do the social right thing, whatever it is. So maybe the participation rate in paying gardeners is higher in Palo Alto than in some other places. Who knows? But the short of it is that gardeners are struggling just as much as anybody else is, right? Um, and so the question is whether one can kind of become to be more practical over time now that one has used the sledgehammer. And of course, in order to do that, you need to have a bunch of other things in place. But the communication of that is going to be quite important, quite relevant. And so we see different places of the world handle these things differently. And so, but talking about kind of griping and complaining about things that may or may not happen, um, heard yesterday somebody make the comment that when you there's always going to be people complaining, talking mostly about the bailouts, government aids, and whatnot. And some people will complain when you don't give aid. Some people will complain when you do give aid. And so you might as well just do it and let the chips fall where they are. You might just do what the right thing is. Now, obviously, the right thing isn't the eye of the beholder, but if the elected officials do something, well, they might as well do it and not worry about all the the backbench complaining. And I of course, I sympathize with that significantly. That said, what I'm advocating, I ultimately, I mean, I have a preference about which way one should open things up, but if it, I also get it that it's not going to happen my way. It's going to be happening whichever the bureaucrats think of, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be all right. But what I think would be helpful is always to think a little bit about the unintended consequences. And I just get reminded of what happened after the financial crisis, um, that there was, in my view, never an unbiased analysis of what happened. It was a bash the banks at all cost, and doesn't mean that they needed to be defended, but there are some consequences. One of them was a lack of liquidity in the markets during the panic now earlier this month, which caused some severe disruptions around the world. Um, but at the other end of the spectrum, we clearly had the rise of socialism, and it was Nancy Pelosi, I believe, just mentioned yesterday that, well, why not have a basic income for various groups? And so those sort of ideas come up, and we live in an environment where we are very willing and able to spend a lot of money, and so who knows what's going to come of it. We quote unquote only got the rise of socialist sentiment last time around. What will happen now when people come back and said, "Hey, we've given left out bailouts to everybody, left and right." So back to the markets. So some people have pointed out the Fed has been buying more in securities that have been issued, so exceeding even the deficit. That's not easy right now, I suppose. Um, and then beyond that, yeah, if I look at my screen, there's an easing of curbs, having of curbs on the virus that's in there, and a general easing of the environment. Any case, I shall leave it at that. We do have a Fed meeting this week. We do have an ECB meeting this week. We have some other central bank meetings this week. So there will be some interesting things happening. And with that, everybody, have a great day and stay safe out there. Take care. Bye bye.